falling toys. The earliest thing I can remember that really freaked me out about my house was the reoccurring experience of soft toys that I put away on top of my wardrobe suddenly falling to the floor. I would notice that a toy had definitely been on top of my wardrobe before I went to bed, would be on the floor when I woke up the next morning. Being a very young kid, it did freak me out, but I didn't really understand ghosts or anything, so I just kind of laughed it off, thinking it was the wind or poor placement of the toys. But as this became more common, I became more unsettled. I remember once when I heard a soft thud. I turned to see a toy hedgehog now on the floor. I was fed up at this point, and so I picked up the toy and said to the empty air, "If that was you, do it again." Nothing happened, so I brushed it off and tried to go on. I told my younger sister about what had been happening, and we both laughed about it. I had asked if she had had any similar experiences, but she said no. The last time I can remember a toy falling from my wardrobe was the worst of all. My sister had a friend over for a sleepover, and she had told her friend about the weird experiences. Their friend had asked to see it, so they came to my room. All three of us stood near the doorway, and I noticed the hedgehog on the floor again. I called out once again to the empty air, "If there's someone here, knock a toy off the wardrobe." We all waited in silence until suddenly there was a soft thud and a toy had fallen. I don't remember much of what I was thinking. All I remember was hearing someone scream and running out of my room. A toy hasn't fallen off of the wardrobe since. Sounds in the night. The next thing I remember happening in my house was a collection of small, unsettling things that happened in the middle of the night. I've always had trouble sleeping, so it was not uncommon for me to be awake long into the night when everyone else was asleep. It was during these unsettled nights that I would hear and experience a lot of things that I couldn't explain. The most common thing I remember happening was various creaks and sounds of people moving around. It wasn't unusual for my floorboards to creak, but they would only creak when people were walking around. But every time I checked to see if anyone was up and moving, they'd all still be fast asleep, and my sister's door would still be closed. There were also many occurrences of my hearing the sounds of scratching at my door if it was closed. This wasn't something that worried me, as we'd always owned cats, so I would just go and open the door to let them in. However, on multiple occasions, I opened the door to an empty corridor with no cats even upstairs. That never sat right with me. The most disturbing and unexplainable thing that happened in the night was something I'll never forget. It had been a completely normal night. I had fallen asleep moderately easily, but a few hours later I woke back up and couldn't get back to sleep. I was frustrated, but so young that I didn't have a phone to keep me entertained, so I sat doing nothing until I could fall back asleep. However, before I could even get tired, a loud crash sound came through my room. I looked up frantically to see a small yellow ball bouncing on my floor, like it had just been thrown into my room. I was terrified. I picked up the ball and ran into the corridor, expecting to see maybe my sister or my mum. But the house was silent. My parents were fast asleep, and my sister's door was closed. For context, my sister always closes her door at night, and we always know when a door opens because her door has always been unbearably loud when opening. It creaks and floods the entire house with noise, so I knew immediately she had not left her room that night. Moving doors. Another common occurrence in my house that still happens to this day is doors opening and closing without any wind or human influence. The most notable instance of this was one day where I was washing my hands and suddenly the bathroom door swung closed. I looked up in panic and watched as the door began to swing open and closed. I shouted out to see if anyone was on the landing, but my family were all downstairs. I cautiously turned around and called out for whatever was there to prove itself by closing the door. After a few seconds' pause, the door slammed shut and I screamed, quickly opening the door and running out of the bathroom. Once I had calmed down, I went back to the bathroom, thinking it might have been the wind. But to my horror, the window was closed tight. Ouija board sessions. For Christmas one year, I asked for a Ouija board. I was a weird kid. I used the board a few times with family in locations other than my own house. I had never been confident enough to use it in my home. Knowing the already concerning experiences I had had over the years, I was too scared to risk communicating with whatever may be living in the house. But one night, I decided that I felt brave enough to use the board in my house. It was around 2 a.m. I got the board out ready and opened it, using the safest methods I knew. I sat with my fingers resting on the planchette for a few minutes. I was too scared to ask anything. It felt like all of my courage from moments ago had vanished into thin air. I sat in tense silence for a few minutes before finally asking a question. Is there anyone who would like to communicate? I asked quietly, not wanting to wake the others in my house. Almost instantaneously, the planchette slid across the board. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I hadn't expected a response, especially not one this quickly. I tried to quell my building panic as the planchette flew across the board and sat firmly on yes. I sucked in a sharp breath and tried to think of what to ask next. What's your name? I asked, more cautiously. No response. How old are you? Still nothing. I asked a few more questions, still to no avail. I had got one explicit response and then nothing more. Not even a shift. The planchette sat completely motionless on yes. Feeling defeated, I shut down the board. However, I couldn't just leave it like that. I had an uneasy feeling brewing in my stomach. I sat and contemplated what to do for a while before deciding to reopen the board and try again. I repeated the opening process and got ready to ask the questions again, this time with more determination. Is anyone there who would like to communicate? I asked once again. The planchette flew to yes, this time with more force. I had to swallow back a yelp at the action. I repeated the same questions from the previous session, and still I received no response, apart from the first response. My blood ran cold. I felt as if there was a looming presence in the room, watching my every move, but I couldn't see anyone. I closed the board frantically and hid it behind my bed. The feeling of pure terror didn't leave. I didn't fall asleep that night. I've never used that board in my room since. Sometimes when I see it in the corner of my eye, I can still feel that terrifying presence looming over my shoulder. So since I was little, I've always been very curious about the paranormal, and also obsessed with the story my mother told me about one of her experiences at her old job. Until 2 years ago, I had never had any experience, but the activity has increased. My first ever experience was in the middle of a class where I felt someone touch me on the back several times, but it couldn't be any of my classmates because I was in the back. From that day on, I've had several things happen to me in my house. I've heard very uncommon names in the country where I'm from. There have been objects thrown. I feel like I'm being watched and stuff like that. But there are 4 occasions I can't forget. 1. I've seen an old lady going from my bathroom to my parents' room. I've actually talked with my parents and uncle-aunt about this, and my aunt told me that it fit the description of my great-grandmother. 2. I heard a male screaming, "Get out," when I was going to go back to sleep. 3. So everyone knows the shadow man and stuff. I saw a tall, skinny man, completely white, almost like he was made of light. He was just standing on my doorway looking at me. I didn't feel safe at all. 4. This one happened pretty recently. So I think about 5 days ago, I asked my mum about the place in which she had the experience I talked about in the start, because I always had an image come into my mind when I thought about it. I was basically asking her, "Oh, was there a large dark table made out of wood?" And she looked kind of surprised and just confirmed everything I asked. I never saw a photo of the place, so I was just kind of in shock. Little backstory. I've been able to see things to a certain degree since I was young. Witchcraft runs in my family. I played a Ouija board before when I was 14, now 18. There's a shadow man and a female spirit that is like my bedroom. These spirits like to turn on my fan. The fan has a button that turns it on. Nothing else can turn it on. This happened last night, around 2:30 to 2:44 a.m. I'd come back from the hospital at around 1:30 and fell asleep next to my partner. I woke up and there was a face about 4 to 6 inches away from mine that I could fully see in my dark bedroom. It looked Caucasian, blue eyes, bald, no eyebrows or facial hair. I could also feel the bed sink down as if someone was over top of me, holding themselves up. It spoke calmly. You need to get up. It got off and stood by my laundry basket about 3 feet away from the foot of my bed. I felt it get off the bed as my bed rose and moved. My partner was still sound asleep. As it stood by my basket, he said it again. You need to get up. I could only see its face as the rest of him was completely black, and no physical features could be made out. I asked what, but it didn't say anything back. I sat up, and a few seconds after that, it was gone. I went back to sleep after a few minutes, and nothing else happened for the rest of the night. For some context to us moving, me and my family were moving between states with our 2 dogs. We stopped in Tombstone, Arizona, and were staying there for the night. At some point in the day, a man sitting on a bench across the street from a store stops us and says to look up to a window because you could see a silhouette of a ghost. I was the only one who didn't see it. Later on, we went to our hotel, and the next morning, my brother and mom both said that they woke up in the middle of the night in sleep paralysis and saw a figure in our room. Fast forward some, we get to our new house for a few years, eventually get a 3rd dog, and while living here, the others claim they saw some paranormal events. Some at home, some out around town, or off the side of roads. Again, I never saw or felt the presence of anything. So finally, we're moving to our current residence. This is when I absolutely experienced something paranormal. Before I say what I felt, I'll talk about what I didn't have. Our 3 dogs weren't with us at the time. They were either at a pet hotel or at an apartment one of my parents was at, due to work, and they moved here before the rest of us. I cannot recall whether we had slept in our current house at this point. I know for certain that we had only just begun unpacking, and I only had my bed unpacked. We didn't have Wi-Fi. There was nothing for me to do at home, and even though I was a sophomore in high school, I didn't have my own cell phone. I hadn't even started attending my new school yet. So my parents and brother decided they wanted to go to a jiu-jitsu class. They already knew I didn't care to go, but they asked me one more time if I'd like to go just to watch. I once again declined. If I had the foresight to realize we didn't have Wi-Fi, I probably would have gone with them. I'm not too sure why my mother didn't leave her phone for me, because in my older house, this was something that happened a few times. It was already pretty late in the day. Alright, to the story. I'm now home alone, no dogs, no entertainment, no Wi-Fi, no phone. Well, I had a 3DS, but not my charger. I'm playing games for a bit when I notice it's about to die, and realize I left my charger in the car. My fun is now over. I can't recall what I'm doing, but for about 10 minutes I'm slowly getting bored. Something starts to feel off, but I brush it off as being in a new house all alone. It was a very quiet night. I was sitting on my bed listening to the echo of the highway a few miles out. Normally, I can't hear it when the AC turned on, but when it's turned off and dead quiet in my house, I can hear it. So the only things I can hear is the echo of a distant highway and the gentle ringing of oncoming tinnitus. Then I hear footsteps. It sounded like someone was walking on carpet. There's just this distinct noise to it. The door to my room was wide open, but even if it was closed, I would have heard footsteps. Even if I did close it, I couldn't lock it. Every doorway in my hall was open right now. I'm sitting there, frozen in place. What felt like a few minutes go by, and I hear footsteps. It's undeniable that I'm hearing footsteps. I slowly start to stand up, and very cautiously make my way to the bathroom. When I walk out into my doorframe, the feeling that something is wrong starts to flood into me. I don't move at all. I'm just standing there waiting. When I hear a third footstep, I quickly dart for the bathroom across the hall and close the door, locking it. For a few minutes, I didn't hear anything. Then I hear another footstep. This time, it immediately gets followed up by another one, and then another. I can roughly tell where it is, and I hear it walk up to the bathroom door. At this moment, I was convinced there was someone in the house. For the next few minutes, there would be quick bursts of footsteps, as if someone was speed walking between rooms, stopping for a minute and then moving to the next room. Sometimes it stopped in front of the bathroom door. It was like a louder, constant movement. This goes on for a few minutes. I knew that if there was a person in my house, I probably couldn't fight them off. For some reason, I decided to say, "Go away," the next time the footsteps came up to the door. At this point, I was getting annoyed while still very scared. There was a prolonged period of silence before it moved to another room. It comes back, and I go, "You better leave right now." Silence. It moves to another room. The final time I say something, I say, "Leave me alone," and it goes away. I could still hear it moving around the hall and going to different bedrooms, but it seemed to have stopped waiting at the bathroom door. It also was back to slower footsteps, as if someone was trying to be quiet. Eventually, the footsteps walked away and sounded like they went somewhere else in the house. I quit hearing them for the remainder of the night. I was too scared of what happened and stayed in my bathroom. Overall, I think I heard someone walking for about 45-ish minutes. When my parents came home, they were gone for about 2.5-ish hours. I explained what happened and we checked the entire house, after which everyone claimed it must have been a ghost. They were all surprised at how shaky I was and that I looked pale. To this day, I'm still skeptical on what really happened. Never witnessed or heard anything paranormal like this by myself prior. For the past few years living here, others in my family have experienced and seen things, even footsteps. I haven't had any more encounters. My wife and I bought a house in the country, next to a Civil War battlefield in Northern Virginia. The original property was a 4,000-acre plantation that was subdivided into multiple smaller farms. The original plantation house of the 4,000-acre property was situated on our lot 15 yards behind the house, with all of its stone foundation, chimney, and well. Our house was built in the mid-80s by hand and by the previous owner, who worked for NASA and IBM, and passed away after a battle with cancer. We fell in love with this house and property. You could tell this was the man's life's work. After purchasing the house for a great price, we walked the property with his widow and oldest adult son. They walked the entire property and house with us. But what I found odd is that both the widow and son adamantly refused to enter the half-unfinished downstairs basement. Long story with too many experiences to list. My wife and I, over the course of 5 years, friends and family that stayed the nights, all experienced poltergeist phenomena. From the TV changing itself to the NASA space station channel regularly, the cabinet slamming, footsteps heard throughout the house, an out-of-body sound of someone clear as day whistling, for a dog was heard by everyone regularly. Sometimes the whistling would be right over our shoulder, in our ear, like it was messing with us. Sometimes while you were in the shower. One time in the basement alone, I was painting the ceiling on a ladder, and I heard the double whistle right in my ear over my shoulder. So loud and clear, I jumped off the ladder, backed myself up against the wall to see what was coming. I was so freaked out, I actually ran out the back door to the backyard and went around the house to get back upstairs, instead of running through the basement to get to the stairs. I'm not an easily shaken man by any means whatsoever, but that was too much. My dog would always stare and bark at the top corner of the family room. He refused to go downstairs. I would pick him up and physically carry him downstairs to only have him sprint right back up and bark at us from the top of the stairs till we came back up. My wife has had a hand brush across the back of her neck multiple times. Sinks, lights turning on by themselves right in front of us. Keys and other important small things go missing to never be found again, no matter how hard we searched every inch of the house. I would wake up around 4:30 a.m. to go to work and would regularly find the same two doors leading out back towards the old plantation house wide open, with bugs and mosquitoes flying in for Lord knows how long. Maybe all night after we made sure to lock them every night. My mother-in-law was awoken one night by a man's voice asking her, "Who are you?" While living in a haunted house, you have no choice but to ignore the activity. We got used to it, and it would come and go in cycles. We never felt in a bad presence or saw any apparitions. We always figured it was the old owner, and would always joke to each other, "There goes Mr. Copper." But one day, I was home alone laying on the couch in broad daylight after a long day of work, when I heard a bang so loud that it actually shook the entire 3,000 square foot house, and it sounded like it came from our large attic. I immediately jumped up and thought one of the large oak trees around the house crashed through the roof. I sprinted outside to assess the damage, but the roof was completely fine on the trees. My second thought was that our AC units in the attic we had just replaced fell off the pedestals and crashed through the ceiling. I grabbed a flashlight and scoured the entire attic to find nothing wrong. Definitely no earthquake in the area, and no other neighbors felt anything. Seems like the activity in the house picked up 10 times towards the last month while we were there, getting the house ready to sell. It's been 2 years since we moved and had no activity since. But not a day goes by where I don't think about the strange activity in the house. Was just curious if anyone has had similar experiences, especially with unexplained house shaking bang. About 7 years ago, in my house, I began to have weird experiences we would call un duende, which is similar to a dwarf, goblin, or gnome. It first began as someone knocking the window of my parents' bathroom. They occurred at daytime. At first I thought it was the wind when it hit the window, but I tried an experiment recreating the sound, and it wasn't the same as the wind hitting the window. Some days later, I was walking outside in my yard and saw the line of flower pots we had. I began to see something rustling and running towards me in the pots. I ran inside my house and had my door slightly open from the dining room. I was looking at the door when I saw a small shadow figure with a point on its head, walking creepily until it had hid behind the cabinet there. I was mesmerized, so I decided to tell my brother about my events. He told me I was being dumb and crazy, even though he had heard the knockings in the window before. So one day, when the lights went out at night, he was using a cell phone flash to light. And when lighting his feet while walking, a shadow figure began to run between his legs and he screamed about it. Even sometimes he was outside and could see my dog crouch and growl at something, sometimes but nothing was there. Even once he was in the bathroom and heard the knocking and how something dropped off and stepped on the tank in the ground in front of the window, like if it was escaping from their mischief. Another day, I was just waking up in the morning and heard some whistling, like calling for attention. It was weird, because it was like if it came from outside, but you could hear it close. And it was like it came from the ambience. The major thing that happened is that one day, the house keys got lost. So my mom was angry and made us look for them. We looked for them all day and night and eventually let it go. The next day I went to college and received a call from my mom, telling me she found the keys, and I asked her, where were they? She told me, they were in the window outside of my bathroom. Did you put them there? I was shocked, because neither my brother and I took the keys, and my mom was angry enough, so we also discarded the fact that she did it to prank us.
I have this weird thing that happened in 2015. I still, to this day, can't fully figure it out. I was sleeping, and in my dream, I was watching myself sleep clear as day. Not so odd, right? I've heard about that happening before. Now, the next part of the story is truly odd. The next morning, when I woke up, my mum had mentioned to me that she went to the bathroom while she was watching TV. My bedroom door was open that night, and she said that she saw a shadow standing over me, like it was watching me sleep. She thought it was odd, but went to the bathroom and back to watching TV. I then told her what I was dreaming about the night she had seen that. She was shocked, and we both still can't figure it out. What do you think it was? Was it me? As in my spirit? Or could it have been something else, like a ghost of some sort? We've had many run-ins with ghosts in this house. This house was built in the early 1800s, and we've lived here for 25 years now, and have had many odd, weird run-ins with ghosts. I've also used a ghost box and got some weird stuff and direct answers to questions that 5 or 6 people all heard at the same time. So I moved in here 2 years ago, on Halloween. I'm going to quickly go through things that have happened. Please note, I live alone with my cat. There used to be a smallish shower curtain rod on my shower, and one of the first nights after I moved in, that rod had been pulled up and off the shower. Hard to explain without pictures, but you would have needed to push up on the rod for it to have come off. My cat was shut in the closet overnight. Random things will be out of place or moved slightly. This has only happened a handful of times. However, last night at around 1:30 a.m, I woke up to a loud noise in my room and thought my shelf of nail polishes fell or something, because that has happened and it's loud. However, when I turned on the light, I discovered a small square table I have was pushed out from against the wall where I literally always have it. My cat hates my office. Anytime I'm in there, he'll come in, no matter what he's doing, and sit and stare at me and meow until I leave and then go back to sleep somewhere. My upstairs neighbours used to live here and said their daughter always hated sleeping in her room. One time, I swear I hadn't touched the stove. It was first thing in the morning, and I have a smoothie for breakfast every day and don't usually use the stove until, like, dinner time. But I was sitting watching TV and started smelling gas. I went to the stove and one of the burners was turned just enough that the gas was leaking. Let me also say I've never felt threatened by whoever or whatever is living here, except for the time with the stove. I was scared mostly because of what had happened when I wasn't home. My cat probably would not still be here with me. However, I have noticed that the most activity happens when I'm going through something difficult emotionally. And I'm wondering if this is actually technically poltergeist activity. The first few months I moved in, and I had a bunch of experiences. I was really stressed about having just moved and needing to find a new job in a new place, a new city, new everything. The time with the stove, I was feeling very depressed and suicidal. Last night with the table in my room being pushed. Right now, I'm dealing with childhood trauma stuff in therapy, and it is no fun because I've honestly never dealt with it until now. But generally, there's a lot of negative emotions I'm working through right now. A little background. Growing up in my parents' house, we had the largest cemetery in town, directly behind our house. To give a picture, there was my house with a 6-foot wooden fence, and then a copse of pine trees, which was cemetery land, the area that the cemetery vaults were retained, and then the cemetery itself. The man who originally built the house had put in a gate in the back of the fence, because his business was abutted to the cemetery property. But when he and his wife divorced, he sold the house. But there were 2 paths that led from that gate, one to his business and one to the cemetery itself. In this cemetery, there are over 3,000 graves, most of them with flat plaques. Very uniform and neat, with a few headstones, a couple mausoleums, and few private burial sites that require a key. Also, several of my family members are buried there. My great-grandparents, great-uncles, aunts, uncles, and cousins. This is about my great-grandma, who died of a broken heart 6 months after my great-grandfather died. She would be at our house all the time after he passed. My father and mother are diligently taking care of her. She was in her 80s, and I didn't realise what a treasure she was at the time, since I was in 5th grade. She would often take naps in my room, meaning that I would have to give up my privacy and hang out with my family when my introverted self wanted to be alone. Then, one day, my mum was in the kitchen crying because great-grandma had been in the hospital, but I didn't know it was serious. She had died of a heart attack, but really, it was a broken heart. She had never been that ill, but her health took a sudden turn for the worst when she lost her mate. The other thing about my great-grandmother, she was a stickler for cleaning up. She took pride in her house being clean. After she passed, I guess she decided that she liked our house the best. My mom always had a cup of tea in the morning and afternoon. She'd put the mug she used in the morning near the stove so she could reuse it in the afternoon. We'd all of a sudden start finding it near the sink with water in it. Also, beds that were unmade would be made, especially mine, since great-grandma would nap in my bed. I never heard the tap of the sink go off, but I did often hear the clink of the mug hitting the counter. There was only ever one mug broken. This phenomena was still going on, not as much, until my parents' house was decimated by a tornado. The house is being rebuilt on the same property. We hope that great-grandmother's ghost hasn't been too disturbed. This is a story from when my brother and I were kids, visiting the Philippines, where our parents came from Ilocos Sur, Luzon. We were elementary school age at that time, and so is that memory. This area is very country, with rice fields and such. There were rarely any buildings higher than 1 story. The street the family home was on was dirt and unnamed. Our older cousins made my brother and I some slingshots. I loved that thing. It was made from the branches of some trees and elastic bands from a vulcanizing shop. After terrorizing the local animals, I got in trouble, and so I found this big discarded metal vegetable oil can for target practices. I set up the oil can on top of a small table and put it in front of this bamboo clump. It made a nice loud metallic clunk noise, so we had a blast, until some older cousins came along. They said we probably shouldn't be shooting there because a duende lived in that bamboo clump. Being a little know-it-all city punk, I decided to ignore them. Besides, I was having fun. My little brother, of course, decided to follow my lead. Nothing happened until the following morning. My memory is also a little spotty, and you'll soon understand why. I woke up with a really bad fever. I remember profusely sweating and having a pounding headache. I felt so weak, I had a hard time moving unassisted. I couldn't even sit up. I remember my shirt being changed frequently. I was sweating so bad. I remember old women crowding into the room and praying over me. I remember candles with the Virgin Mary being in it. I remember being hit with big leaves. They might be mullein leaves. I remember being made to drink this dark, reddish, aromatic tea. I remember being carried to the bathroom to bathe in the same dark, reddish, aromatic tea. Then I remember one morning feeling absolutely fine. It was as if nothing happened. I don't know how long I was sick. It may have been days. It may have been just 24 hours, one and done. I don't remember. As for my brother, he didn't get sick, but one of his eyes got severely swollen. It was like he was smuggling a cue ball behind that thing. He said it didn't hurt when I asked him. His vision wasn't impaired, but boy did that thing get huge. No one really knew what to make of it, and were kind of freaking out until Grandpa came to the rescue. He came with this small vial of rose oil that he put on top of the swollen area. The following morning, it was completely gone. Our grandpa said he went to the bamboo clump with the rose oil and asked the duende for forgiveness for his dumbass grandsons. He prayed there for hours until he felt like something happened, and that's when he came back with the rose oil. At least, that's what people said when I asked when I got older. They also said my brother's eye got swollen because he accidentally hit the duende in the eye while we were doing our target practice. Even though this happened decades ago and that bamboo clump no longer exists, I still treat that area with reverence and respect. I will greet and say my farewells to the duende every time I pass through there, because you never know. And it's the right thing to do. I want to say I believe in the paranormal. I had some previous strange experiences and I read tarots. I couldn't, however, explain what happened. It was summer 2021. I was sleeping in, but felt the urge to go to the bathroom, so I got up. I remember checking the time on my phone, and it was 7:43 a.m. I went to the bathroom, which is next door to my bedroom, asked my mum, who was there doing the laundry, to exit the bathroom, doing my business, seeing a cockroach, exit the bathroom, telling my mum about the cockroach, and then I went back to bed. I want to say I suffer from a lot of sleep problems, and I usually feel very sleepy during the morning, but not that time. I was feeling restless and energetic, but I forced myself to calm down and fall back asleep. Obviously, I had trouble falling back asleep, but since I suffer from insomnia, I have some methods I can use. When I noticed they weren't working, I checked the time again, and surprise, surprise, it was still 7:43 a.m, down to the dot. That freaks me out, but I try to stay calm. I checked the time on Google to see if my phone was having a glitch or something, but it gave me the same result. I think that at least 10 minutes passed between my waking up and my checking on the time. After forcing myself to relax, I managed to fall back asleep. Later in the morning, I asked my mum if she felt anything out of the ordinary, but she said no. She also told me that all of our house electronics were working just fine. I don't do drugs, never once did in my life, and carbon monoxide poisoning isn't a possibility. Back in university days, I lived in a small 3-bedroom apartment with 2 other roommates. My apartment was on the topmost floor of the building, and also the last room on the floor. It's numbered 707. Our only neighbour is 706, which has been vacant for a while. So our side of the building is very quiet and sparse of people in general. There are 3 bedrooms which are adjoined in an upside down L shape. 1 room in the middle, 1 room to the left of it, and another room below it. For ease of storytelling, I will call it the middle room, bottom room, and left room. My own room is the bottom room. To be noted, these are Japanese rooms and buildings, so wooden flooring, sliding doors, sliding closet inside the room, thin wood panel, wall between rooms. The left room and middle room both had heavy sliding doors. Between the middle room and my bottom room, there was a hollow space that is a pretty large closet with sliding doors as well. It's the closet where you fold and store futons and such. The story happened on a summer vacation. The owner of the middle room had been away for a few days and wouldn't be back until the new semester started. One night, the owner and I were chilling in each of our rooms. Left room over, we'll call her Lefty, was supposed to leave for summer vacation in a week and had been packing. I kept hearing loud thuds and sounds of something heavy hitting the wall and floor, but I ignored it because I assumed she was packing. About 11 at night, Lefty texted me, "Yumi, are you okay? Are you sick?" I was confused. Lefty continued, "I keep hearing someone sneezing and coughing. Isn't that you?" I said, "No, I've been quiet this entire time. Isn't it you who's been moving around and packing boxes?" Lefty said, "What? I haven't been packing anything at all today. I've been on my bed, playing with my phone the entire time." Immediately, I put down my headset and laptop and just sat straight on my bed, looking at the text on my phone, feeling somewhat disturbed. About 5 minutes later, Lefty came to my room and we both sat together, confirming with each other what we heard. She heard someone sniffling and sneezing. I heard thuds and the sound of someone on the floor, like the sound of boxes or something pushed against the floor. We sat in silence in my room and the sound came again, thuds and knocks. Looking at each other, we figured it out. She thought the sound came from me. I thought it came from her. In between our 2 rooms, the common space is the unoccupied middle room. There was knocking, thuds, sounds of boxes moving, and there was the sound of footsteps for sure. It sounded like a very active person inside the room the entire night. Neither one of us wanted to go check, so we tried to ignore it and just slept it through. Fast forward to morning. Lefty is an early riser, while I don't wake up until 9 or 10. My bed is on the right side of the door, but I sleep facing the door. I just woke up and I heard loud footsteps from outside my room, like someone was running, and I saw a short shadow passing through the cracks of my slightly open door. It took my sleepy brain a while to process this. Running footstep sounds is very common because my room is beside the front door, so every school day my roommates would make this commotion outside my door when they're going out of the house. However, the first thing I finally noticed, this is summer vacation. Who would be running in a rush like this in the hallway? The second thing, that shadow looked too short to be my roommate. It's the height of a child. The third, I can see the shadow through the cracks of my slightly open door. Who opened my door? I don't sleep with my door open. Feeling scared I immediately texted Lefty and asked where she was. She said she had left the house since 7:30 a.m. because it's Sunday church and currently she's about to get lunch. She didn't open my door nor touched my room, and it was closed when she left. I immediately got up and ran out of the house to meet Lefty and told her about this morning. We decided to drag another friend and asked him to help us check our apartment to see if there's anyone or something. The three of us walked into the apartment and towards the middle room. We noticed something weird. The door was slightly opened. It was a sliding door and quite heavy, so there's no way it can open by itself. We confirmed that neither me nor Lefty had touched that door since the owner left last week. It was always closed. Our friend opened the room and we immediately felt chills. He asked where we heard the sound coming from, and I said from my room. It sounded like it came very close. Right on the wall connected between my bottom room and this middle room. That's when we realised. The wall connected between my room and this middle room, where we heard all the activity, it was inside the closet. I live in Puyallup, tribal land, and I've heard of Wendigos and skinwalkers, etc. I was on my way home in an area where sometimes the unhoused hang out. So when I saw this thing crossing the road, my brain tried to rationalise it as an unhoused person behaving and looking really weird. A few seconds later, my eyes caught up to my brain, and I just knew that wasn't an unhoused person. The details of what it looked like are too strange. It jumped on the road ahead, probably 10 yards or so in front of me, and began running from my left to my right. It was running from the sidewalk of a parking lot into the front of the local dishes building, where had it been a person, and at the speed it was going, I would have been able to see them on my right. It was hunched, about the size of an Irish wolfhound, or slightly bigger, and it looked to be running either on all four limbs, or so hunched that its long arms almost touched the road. It wore a cape or long coat, which covered its body except for the hands, which were long and spindly. This cape thing was light brown, almost looked like it was made out of fur. The worst part was the head. I saw that super clearly. It was a big head with a long snout, kind of like the aforementioned wolfhound, with shaggy brown hair dangling on one side. And I could clearly see a long mouth, like long, slightly open, and I could see teeth. I saw its eyes. It was shiny, almost reflective, and orange-ish. It ran fast. It dangled its arms, and as I drove by, I slowed down to look. Nothing was there. I have a dash cam, so I thought for sure I could check it. Quality is crap, because my glass is dirty. I tried to crop those 2 minutes so I could get a clear view. There is a very bright car light coming towards me on the opposite side of the road that would have for sure been blocked by a person or animal running across it. So, I'm over here trying to email it to myself and it won't send. I'm trying to save it and it won't save. So, now what? Am I cursed? There isn't much out there, and I'm not sure what to do. I've never told anyone about this, because I do not believe in the paranormal. I always thought it was bullshit. Honestly, I still don't believe it, but since this event, I still do not understand if it was real, or if my mind projected something weird for a few minutes. This situation happened 4 years ago. It was January, and I was alone in my apartment in the summer, but my parents would come home for a visit in a few hours. It was too hot and almost night, and I had the great idea of taking a cold shower. Since there was nobody, I didn't close the door to the bathroom, but the shower glass door was closed all the time. While I was taking a shower, I saw something walk in front of me outside the bathroom. This thing went to the left and to the right 4 times. The first time, I thought that could be my imagination. But the second time, the figure passed through the bathroom. I turned off the shower and yelled, "Anybody there?" I thought it was my parents, but nobody answered. The figure made the same trajectory. Right, left, right, left. The 4th figure stopped outside the bathroom and it was looking at me for 10 to 15 seconds. Then the figure went to the left and I opened the door. I yelled again, but nobody answered. I got out of the bathroom and walked to each part of the apartment. Nobody was at home. Only me. Sometimes this situation gives me shivers. About 2 years ago, I fled a house I was assaulted in, took my savings, and drove up and down the majority of the East Coast. I went south to Florida, and as I started working my way back, I started wondering if I should head west. I've always wanted to go west. In Washington, D.C., I was outside the Walmart. A woman passed me, and several minutes later came back to ask me if I believed in Jesus. She said the Spirit had told her to come back to talk to me, to tell me that I need to turn around. I thanked her for the message. Later that night, I was headed north again. Laurel, Maryland. A man approached me and told me that I was going the wrong way, that I needed to turn around. He said very little else. Waterville, Maine. A man approached me to ask for a lighter. We smoked in silence, side by side, a few moments before he spoke. He said, "I'm God's 3rd messenger. God says you are going the wrong way. If you do not turn around, you will die." I did not continue further north or head west. I went back to a town I knew had plenty of resources, got a job, and saved just enough money to repair a series of car issues as they happened. It's been some time since these 3 strangers all approached me with similar messengers, but the last one sends tingles down my spine still. I feel kind of like a crazy person asking for this, but it doesn't feel like these things are a coincidence. What exactly did I experience? I think about this a couple of times a year, and I've looked it up, but never find anything similar. This happened a few years ago. One night, my now wife and I were driving back from Sonic. We lived in a very old, very small town in West Texas. It was raining, but not heavily. Puddles on the ground, wet enough that it would be weird for someone to be walking around. On top of that, there's lots of roads with little or no lighting, so lots of the roads are mostly dark at night. We were driving down one such road when this happened. As my wife and I were driving, I looked to my right and saw what I can only describe to be a faceless man. Not deformed, but faceless. His face was white, or really, all of him looked white. He looked almost like a blur. His arms seemed impossibly long, almost down to the ground. And were moving in just an unnatural way. Arms swinging back and forth aimlessly, but also very fast. The best I can describe this man's movements is that he looked like he was glitching. We weren't moving fast, probably 25 miles per hour, because we were in a residential area. I looked at him long enough that I had time to wonder what I was looking at before he went out of my view. For a second, I even wondered if someone was using a weed whacker or doing yard work. But of course not. It was 9 p.m. and raining. I said nothing to my wife, assuming my eyes had just played tricks on me. It was dark. Maybe the rain blurred the window. I didn't know. A couple hours later, my wife asked me if I noticed the man on the side of the road that had no face. Still, the creepiest thing that's ever happened to me. Anyone know what this might be called? Or anyone who's had a similar experience? It's 4 a.m. and I can't sleep because this is clogging up my mind, and my boyfriend isn't home to talk to about it as he's at work. I'm a skeptic. I don't believe in God, the afterlife, ghosts, or anything else paranormal. But a couple of months ago, I had an experience that's rattled my usual mantra of there is always a logical explanation, and it's had me questioning my lifelong perception. I'd gone on a camping trip with my partner, and we were sleeping in a tent close to a riverbank, following a day of fishing. There was a little rain about, but nothing to worry us. There was no reception there to check the weather, but that was what we'd gone to this particular area for. Just us getting away for a week alone. I was dreaming, and my mother, who passed away, appeared out of nowhere and grabbed me in quite a panic. "Wake up and go home now!" she screamed at me and shook me quite violently. I could even feel her fingernails scratching my chest in my dream, where she grabbed me on the collared shirt I was wearing. The shrill of her voice and the look in her eyes caused me to jolt awake in a huff, and I woke my partner up with my panic and sudden movement. It was about 1 a.m. My partner asked me if I was okay, because I was actually quite upset and rattled. I could feel a slight stinging pain in my chest, and thinking that I'd been bitten by an ant or spider while I was sleeping, I grabbed the lantern we had in the tent and turned it on to see 6 fresh, identical scratch marks. 3 on either side of my chest on my skin, where I'd dreamt that my mother had scratched me when she'd grabbed me in the dream. "Where did you get those?" my boyfriend asked me. I was more than a little freaked out. The scratches hadn't drawn blood, but they were quite red and noticeable. I had a nightmare that Mum grabbed me and screamed at me to wake up and go home. "I dreamt that she scratched me there," I replied, still very confused, and looking for another explanation for the scratches amongst our blankets. I don't believe in this stuff, but my boyfriend does, and he jumped up, dragged me out of the tent, and threw our belongings and tent into the back of the car as quickly as he could in a jumbled mess. As we drove the 3.5 hours home mid-holiday, all while I tried to convince him that it was just a bad dream and we should go back and live out the rest of our holiday. The next afternoon, my partner practically dragged me into his office to show me on his computer that the area where we'd been sleeping in our tent had been hit by a sudden rise in floodwaters, and the riverbank that we'd been camping on was at least 3 meters underwater. And he explained to me that the waters had apparently risen within an hour of us leaving. I've refused to talk to him about it or admit to him that it's got me rattled and lost for an explanation. But he recently talked me into visiting my mother's grave to thank her for saving our lives. We mowed the lawn and left fresh flowers. I'm hoping that sharing this experience with someone that isn't hell-bent on getting me to admit that this stuff exists will allow me to focus and get some sleep at last. This all happened back in 1985 and 1986, but these are things that my friend and I will never forget. I was working the summers at an old retreat in the North Carolina mountains with about 50 other young adults. It was great fun. While the place had lots of modern buildings, it was ruled over by a hulking white building built in 1912. I think it's important to note that most of the building is just an extension of the mountain itself. It was built using the trees from right where it stands, as well as the rocks and boulders used for the foundation. It's 3 stories, but really 5, counting the basement and the attic full of bats. It was great watching them pour out of there every night. Front of the building is an enormous portico with white columns stretching up all 3 stories. That porch is full of rocking chairs from which you can see a majestic view of the Smoky Mountains. But the back of that building is where we worked. The back of the building was hugged by 2 large wings, forming a U-shape back there. We entered our housekeeping facilities via a fire escape that stretched straight up to the 2nd floor rear entrance. A single green metal door. The door was one I knew well. Housekeeping was my department for 3 summers, and even though this was now just the end of the first summer, I was well acquainted with it. It was big, green, metallic, and heavy as shit. With a pull on the outside and a bar to push on the inside to open it. It did not stay open. In fact, fire regulations required it to stay closed at all times, and it was engineered to shut automatically. So of course, during the summer, with no air conditioning in the building, we kept it propped open with a full bucket of water during the day. Regulations be damned. A few nights before we all left, we were cleaning our dorms and trying to turn it into a party, when we all ran out of cleaning supplies. So around 9 o'clock at night, my best friend and I drive our lazy asses down to the back of the building. It was only a short distance, but there was a very steep incline. We didn't want to walk. I parked my car right in front of the stairs, and we got out. At this point, we both began to feel odd. The air was still and stuffy, and I felt positively enveloped by this building. Standing in the middle with those massive wings rising around us. The building was completely dark, and since we had been shutting it down for winter, it was already locked up tight. My friend had been with me earlier in the day when I had locked that door, the one at the top of the stairs. As we climbed the stairs, I felt positively oppressed and had to stop. My friend did too. I told him I was scared, and he admitted the same. I had never felt scared at this building before, and I had spent plenty of time in it alone, exploring the basement and attic. We passed slowly forward again, and a few steps up, I literally felt an icy chill down my spine. I know it's a stupid cliche, but I've never felt anything like it before or since. Like someone pressed an icicle down the length of my spine. Finally, we reached the top of the stairs, and the instant I put my foot on the top landing, that frickin' door swung open wide and stood open for us, revealing the short entranceway bathed in the red light of the exit sign. I've never been more scared of anything in my life. I get freaked out about it now, 37 years later. We both just stood there completely stunned for what felt like minutes before I completely freaked out. Started screaming incoherently and scrambled down the steps, jumping way too many on the way down. We both ran up the steep incline, yelling and screaming, leaving my car behind. Everyone came down and searched the building with us. It was empty, of course, and the door was shut fast and locked when we got back. No one could have pushed that door open and run away without us hearing them. The floors squeaked when you walked on them, and someone running would have been very loud. I have looked at this from every angle I can think of, but I still have no explanation for what happened. I worked there for 3 more summers in that building and have more stories. My friends stayed to work through the winter one year and saw the Hat Man in the same building.